Thanks very much, Speaker. We set a really simple test when the government said they were going to change industrial relations laws. And the test was this: it had to deliver secure jobs with decent pay. What they've come back with are changes that make work less secure and deliver a pay cut. And they are trying to get away with this under the cover of the pandemic. And under the cover of the pandemic, where people are terrified of their health and terrified of their jobs, they're not even willing to make the case for what they're doing. They're just pretending that what is in black and white in their own legislation, introduced here and now before the floor of this parliament, their response is it doesn't exist. Their own laws don't exist. The Attorney-General today, when presented with a letter of him starting work, apparently that doesn't exist either. Well, I tell you what does exist. What does exist is Australian workers having gone through 8 years of flatlining wages. And then for the last 12 months, a whole lot of them, and we support JobKeeper, we called for the government to do JobKeeper when they didn't want to. But that does mean a whole lot of people have gone from what they would ordinarily earn down to the JobKeeper rate during this time, even if they've held a job. So 8 years of flatlining wages, 12 months of going back to just above the minimum wage, and now, after 12 months of putting off bills, of negotiating with the bank to delay mortgage payments, now, as the economy starts to improve, they get told now's the time you get a pay cut. Now, it's not a new idea. This has happened before. And they told us that what John Howard did to wages was dead, buried and cremated. It was always an odd order, those three, but dead, buried and cremated was what we were told was the view of those opposite. Well, what John Howard did was get rid of the no disadvantage test, and what they're wanting to do is to get rid of the better off overall test. The impact is the same. Like, if you've got a test that's designed to make sure people don't go backwards in their wages and you get rid of it, what do you reckon's going to happen? You've got a safety net and you get rid of it? What do you think will happen to people? Of course this government is deliberately designing something they have always wanted to do and have believed in for more than a decade, which is design a pathway for wages to be cut. And so the heroes of the pandemic, who we heard grand speeches about the shop assistants, about the cleaners, about the health workers, about the caring economy, about the people in warehouses keeping goods moving, about the transport workers and delivery drivers, all of those people who we were meant to be joining together being treated as heroes of the pandemic, now discover that it's this side that wants to make sure they get paid and that side that wants to deliver them a pay cut. A pay cut. That's the thank you after the 12 months those workers have been through. But when the government wants to cut JobKeeper and cut JobSeeker, the reason they give us is, because the economy's doing so well. But then we get told in the next breath, but the economy's doing so badly, we need to cut wages. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. These pay cuts. Now, let me just give you some figures for what it means, because a better off overall test, the thing that it protects is the take-home pay. Where the government wants to take this is that the only thing that is protected is the ordinary hourly rate. So every penalty rate, every overtime rate, every shift allowance, all of that can go and the agreement can still get approved by the Fair Work Commission. What does that mean? Let's ignore the overtime part of it. We know that overtime can go. Ignore that. Let's not count any overtime. Let's just take a few people on part-time hours where they work weekend or night shifts. What would that mean for a part-time aged care worker? Pay cut, $12,000. A part-time parking attendant, $12,000 pay cut a year. Disability home care worker, $14,000 pay cut. Even a hairdresser, a $3,000 pay cut. People are protected from these pay cuts right now because of the better off overall test. And that's what the government wants to get rid of. Now, they'll say, oh, they're only getting rid of it for a couple of years. There are still to this day work choices agreements. To this day, more than a decade later, still around, work choices agreements. The decisions that are made in this parliament about the pay cut that the government wants to proceed with will determine people's pay for more than a decade into the future. Now, the government will again give, in their denial, first they deny it's in the legislation, then they denied it was in a letter, and then they'll say, oh, but the Fair Work Commission will fix it. The Fair Work Commission had never let anything through. Now, can I tell you, I have faith in the Fair Work Commission as an institution, but I have no faith in the way the government makes appointments to it. No faith in the way they make appointments to it at all. Because it used to be the case that you had an even-handed approach on the Fair Work Commission of appointments of who had a background on representing employees and who had a background on representing employers. But now, in terms of the appointments to the Fair Work Commission, 12 with a history of employee representation, 28 with a history of employer representation. Of the presidential members and commissioners, 6 with a history of representing employees, 14 with a history of representing employers, and one of those, Commissioner Boyce. Like, the sort of people that they are putting before the commission, in front of the commission now to run it, it's a game of Russian roulette for workers if they're the people deciding whether you're going to be okay. This is a guy, I do not lie, who was turning up to work in his office with a life-size cardboard cutout of Donald Trump. This is a guy meant to be the impartial observer who was using his social media posts to promote the government. Let's take 2 of the decisions of his that were overturned, the BHP one and the Hungry Jack's decision. Why were they overturned? Guess what he didn't consider? Penalty rates, overtime or allowances on the BHP decision. Same with the Hungry Jack's decision again. Even now, he's trying to find ways to not apply the better off overall test when it's in the legislation. You really think that we're not going to have a situation where if you get the wrong commissioner, these pay cuts will go straight through? And think of how it works. It starts with one labour hire company with very few employees, might have a relationship with the employees, gets the agreement through. That company can then undercut all of their competitors, and they grow and they expand across the market. And then their competitors say, we're losing business, and go to their workforce and say, unless you agree to this, you're all going to lose your jobs. The race to the bottom happens quickly, but the starting gun gets fired here by this government. Secure work determines what it's like for the worker, for the business and for the economy. And I'll tell you, if you don't have a secure job, if your pay's not reliable, I can tell you what, your bills are reliable, your mortgage payments or your rent payments are reliable, and if you're a business, you don't have security of income as a business unless your customers have security of income to pay you. And the economy, right now, there has never been a time in our recent history, certainly in our post-war history, there has never been a time where Australia will be more reliant and dependent on domestic demand. You have some people facing a pay cut and everybody else knowing they're at risk of one. And what do you think that's going to do to domestic demand? I'll say to those opposite, if you believe this, well, defend it. But the fact that the only thing they can say about the pay cut that they are legislating for is to say, oh no, it's not there. The fact that the only thing the Prime Minister can say when confronted with real examples is to say, oh, that's not true. Or when the Attorney-General was challenged with pay cuts that would apply if this legislation went through, and he said, oh, well, they didn't happen last Christmas. Well, the legislation wasn't through. He's meant to know something about the law. He's in charge of it for the nation. All of this comes down to one point. This government is punishing the people who did the right thing by us for the last 12 months. It's unfair to them, it's unfair to business and it's unfair to the Australian economy.